Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today and taking part in this presentation that I'm about to share with you. My name is Nadine Miskovich, and I am a certified recovery coach. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. What that means to me is at the end of this year in December, I'll be celebrating 6 years since finding recovery, which is like absolutely amazing to me, almost unbelievable at sometimes or some points. But what's so exciting and why I even share that in the first place is that my recovery means so much to me. And for me, being able to show up and living this life in recovery today means that I get to show up as a good friend. It means that I get to show up as um, a good sister and a good daughter and an awesome aunt to all of my nieces and nephews. And it also means that I get to show up as a great leader, not only a great leader within my community, but also within the organization that I get the honor and opportunity to help lead today. Today, I do get to help lead a national nonprofit organization called Rise Together. And for us, we've been around since September of 2013. And over the last 6 years, we've been able to educate, engage, and empower over 175,000 young people, not only throughout the state of Wisconsin, which is where I'm from, but also across the entire nation. And for us, we've been able to not only educate, engage, and inspire these young people, but we've been able to create a safe space for them to stand up and speak out around volatile issues that they are faced with. Breaking the silence around topics like suicide, addiction, mental health, bullying, self-harm. I mean, vaping is a huge conversation today. And being able to identify the barriers that are there for them, that, the resources that are lacking, the support that's lacking, we're able to come in and not only identify that, but create this safe space for them to actively get involved in their community, share their own story if they're looking to, and also how to better support their peers. For us, that's something that really, for me specifically, started as, and even our team, it started as a passion project. We started 6 years ago because really we started from this place and from the space of, being sick and tired of losing our friends and family members. And I know all of you here that are listening or watching this presentation, I'm sure you've been affected in some form or another. And for me as an individual, yes, I've been personally impacted due to my own addiction to opioids and other substances, but I've also been affected as a family member. So today, I have numerous family members that I'm grateful for that they are in recovery, but I also have family members that are still in active addiction. And I really wanted to get this opportunity to come and share with all of you what that means to me today and how I have built resilience from it. When we initially got started, even with the work that we do as an organization, we really came from this place of, yes, our friends and family members were dying, and we really wanted to speak out about it. We not only wanted to let people know how terrible this epidemic is, but also the flip side of it. We really wanted to let other people know and understand that recovery is possible and that hope is still there and that people do recover and people do overcome these significant challenges and barriers. But for me personally, that's something that I didn't always believe in. In fact, it was something that I didn't even really know or understand. I mean, when somebody first brought up the term recovery, it was something that I had never even used in my vocabulary before. And so seeing how addiction has not only impacted me personally, but I've also watched it impact family members. And so today I want to walk through a journey with all of you. I want to have a conversation. I want to share a little bit about who I am, where I come from, and how I got to this place today. But I want to be able to share it through the eyes of walking through resilience and what resilience truly means. And if you were to look up the definition of resilience, you would see the word recovery. And I think that that is what is so extremely powerful. And what I am hoping you'll be able to walk away with today is when we are able to recover and maybe bounce back from or come back from a significant challenge or a significant loss or whatever difficult thing that we face in our life, when we overcome that, we're building resilience in the process. And that is something that I personally have been able to do. I fortunately was able to find recovery at the age of 20 years old. So before I could even legally step foot in a bar, I decided and I chose to this path of recovery and to walk through this journey of finding hope and resilience. But it definitely wasn't always that way. In fact, looking back at my recovery journey, there was many things that I had to experience along the way. I think things that I experienced that helped me build up my resilience that I do have today. And in fact, it even stems all the way back to when I watched my parents get divorced. As a young girl, I was 5 years old, and when my parents decided to make the separation, I really started to already at that young age look at myself like maybe I did something wrong. And I didn't really quite understand why my parents were getting divorced. I didn't really understand like why they didn't love each other anymore. And the curiosity that came from that is that I started to believe that maybe it was because of me, or maybe it was my fault, or because they didn't love each other anymore. Why did they not love me anymore? And I didn't really know how to have these questions or how to even have this conversation with my parents. And I certainly didn't really understand what was going on, but I know that my older two sisters did. And so I have two older sisters. My oldest sister is 9 years older than me, and my other sister is 5 years older than me. And I watched how this situation in my family, how it not only affected my parents, but affected us, as children. And as I started to question and not really understand like why my parents didn't want to be together anymore, they started to suffer with their own addictions, and I started to watch my parents struggle, whether it was through their own addictions or financially or through the divorce and having to go to court and all these things that were happening to our family. And it was really hard to understand. And so because I didn't understand as much, I definitely watched my oldest sister understand more of what was going on. And because she understood more of what was going on, I think she started to struggle with it the most. But it was this constant feeling of looking back at myself like, well, what was I doing wrong? My parents were struggling after they got a divorce. I watched my oldest sister start to struggle with her own addictions, and she started running away, and she started getting into trouble with the law. And as she started to make these decisions and choices, yet again, I looked at myself like, well, what am I doing wrong? Was I not being a good enough daughter to my parents for them to stay together? Or was I not being a good enough sister for my sister to come home and to make better and healthier choices? I started to place the blame and shame on my own shoulders, as if I was the problem or as if I was doing something wrong. And what I didn't understand is that none of that was because of me. It was because of their own struggles and their own challenges that they were facing in their life, challenges that they didn't really know how to face or how to even overcome. And so our family really started to suffer in silence. As I watched my parents struggle with their own addictions, I started to question, well, what is going on with my mom? What's going on with my dad? Why can I only stay at my dad's house every other weekend? Then eventually I ended up moving from my mom's and moving in with my dad. And that was a huge transition for me. And I had so many questions as a young girl, but questions that I didn't really know how to ask. And I often believe that it was a conversation that my parents didn't really know how to have either. because I know how difficult it is to have the uncomfortable, vulnerable conversations. And so, because this communication was lacking in my family, this connection was lacking. The connection that I was so desperately searching and yearning for from my parents, I wasn't really receiving. Now, that's not to say that my parents didn't love me or take care of me, because they definitely did. Provided a beautiful home to live in. I had clothes, we had food. It was not, the 110% best environment, but it certainly was a really great place to grow up in. And it's not that I never felt loved by my parents. They were definitely there for me, and they showed up for me, and they still do to this day. In fact, I think we have an even stronger relationship today. But I know that when they were struggling and they were suffering and the communication wasn't there and the connection was lacking, for me as a young girl, I started to, really yearn and really seek for that connection. And unfortunately, I started looking for it in all of the wrong places. Now, I was able to bounce back from the divorce. I was able to bounce back from, watching my sister struggle and watch my parents struggle. So already at a really early young age, I was already building up that resilience. And I think we all do as humans. I think that's something that is what is most natural to us, especially even all the way to when we're a little baby and we learn how to walk. And the first time that you fall down, you get back up again, and you continue to fall and you continue to fall, but you continue to get back up because you're building that resilience. You're learning how to do it better than the time you did before. And so already at this extremely early age, we're already building that resilience in our life. And I know that for me as a young girl, like, that resilience was really strong. And it was also really important. It was important for me to be able to be self-aware of the things that were going on in my life. And now it's not something that I developed yet. When I look at my life in middle school and high school, while I was somewhat self-aware, I was still really struggling. And what I mean by that is this, this connection that I was yearning for and that was lacking in my family. When I mean by I started to look for it elsewhere, I did. I started to hang out with other people. I started getting involved in boys. I lost my virginity at a really young age because I was just desperately searching for a deeper connection with someone. And when I look at my addiction and I look back to my early childhood trauma, and I look at ACEs and adverse childhood experiences that I had in my life, what I really came to realize is not only was the connection lacking, but so was my self-worth. I constantly felt like I wasn't good enough. What I realized is that my addiction was just a small part of my story. And looking back to what my addiction stemmed from, I think using for me was just a way to cope and to mask the pain that I was suffering from. And the pain that I was suffering from was this lack of self-worth, this feeling of not feeling good enough. And I don't know about you, if you have ever experienced that before, and maybe for you it's something different. Maybe it's not just feeling good enough, but maybe it's not feeling smart enough. Maybe it's not feeling pretty enough, or strong enough, or tall enough, or skinny enough, or maybe just not enough in anything that you do. That's how I felt. And more specifically, I constantly felt like I wasn't measuring up. I wasn't measuring up to this expectation that I put on myself, not only that I put on myself, but that society put on me. This expectation that I'm supposed to look a certain way, act a certain way, respond a certain way, all these things that I projected that I thought I was supposed to do and become, that's all I worried about. And I think as young people, we're so easily influenced by the next generation. When we look at our elders and our parents, and especially today, I mean, we could I could go on a whole nother tangent looking at social media and different influencers that people follow, and how we're just so easily influenced by what they do and say and look like and how they act. That was exactly what I was struggling with. And so being able to not only identify those things that I was struggling with, it was really a matter of like, well, if nobody's looking at me, nobody's connecting with me, these are the things that I'm struggling with. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know who I could talk to. And that was one of my biggest barriers, and something I see so many family members and friends that struggle with addiction, is that we don't know how to talk about it. And for me, when I went to school every day, I would show up and I would pretend like everything was just fine. I I would show up to school, and I would put this this fake smile on my face, and I would put on a mask, and I would pretend to be somebody that I wasn't, because it was easier that way. In fact, it was easier for me to not talk about it. It was easier for me to just show up and go along to get along, and to just pretend to fit in, because at the end of the day, like, that's all I wanted. I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to feel normal. I just wanted to feel like my family was normal, because I looked at everybody else's family, and I noticed how they had the nice cars and the nice homes, and they, you know, wore the nice clothes and all these things that I thought my family needed to be. And that really wasn't the case. That really wasn't the truth. I didn't understand or know that all of these outside influences and things that I had in my life, while they played an important role in my life, at the end of the day, they didn't really matter. It didn't matter about having the nicest house or the nicest car. What mattered at the end of the day was the love and connection that I was so desperately seeking. And I know that that is a place that a lot of people, a lot of their addictions, or their mental health disorders, or things that they struggle with today, often stem back to the lack of connection that they didn't have. And as I continued to go through school, and by the time I got into high school, things didn't get any easier. Because as I continued to suffer in silence, I continued to become more sick. And I'm sure you've heard that before. And to understand, for me, it was something that I didn't really even know was happening. Like, it was happening so fast around me that I didn't really understand how to even get out of it. Because by the time I got to high school and I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and I started using and abusing substances on a daily basis, by the time I was 17 years old, I didn't know what to do anymore. It got to the point at 17 years old that I was struggling so bad from using and abusing on a daily basis, before school, during school, after school, on the weekends. It didn't matter when it was. I continued to use, and I continued to suffer in silence. And it got to the point, to be honest with you, that I didn't even want to be here anymore. I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't want to deal with the daily life pressures and stressors that every single teenager has to deal with, that every single person has to deal with. I didn't want to. And not so much that I didn't want to, it's that I didn't know how. Because I thought that I was going at it alone. I thought that I had to have all the answers and that I had to figure it out. It got to the point where it got so bad that I was ready to be done with my life. I was ready to end my life at that point, because I didn't know how to deal. And it got to the point where I was ready and willing to give up. I didn't know who I could even go and talk to about these things. And instead of asking for help or seeking support or finding somebody else that could maybe, walk through this journey with me, I was too afraid by then. I was too ashamed. I was too ashamed of the person that I was becoming and for the mistakes that I was making that I couldn't even face myself in the mirror anymore. I didn't know how to deal anymore. And so instead of seeking support, I started to use even more heavily. In fact, at that point in my life is when I ended up trying opioids for the first time. I had my first Percocet after a morning or after a night of going out, and I partied all night, and the next morning I was hungover and I didn't feel good and I didn't want to go to school and I didn't want to deal with it anymore, and I tried my first Percocet, and after that it was over. After that, I just continued to use more and more and became so heavily addicted because I had no idea. I had no idea how addicting all of this was. And sure, I often heard the phrase to just say no, but just saying no wasn't just that easy. Like I said before, using for me was a way to cope. It was a way to deal. It was a way for me to mask the pain, to get through the things that I was suffering from, mostly because I wasn't dealing with all of the other things that were beneath the surface. And so when I say that by the time I was 17 and I was highly addicted to opioids, that addiction quickly led to intravenous use and quickly led me to using heroin. Something that I never expected. Something that I never even wanted. Something that I never even asked for. And in fact, it was something that I thought I would never become. Because that wasn't me. As a young girl, and I know for us, as young people, we have so many dreams and goals and aspirations and things that we want to do and accomplish. And none of that was happening for me. The light at the end of the tunnel became so dim that I didn't think I was going to ever make it out. But as I stand here before you, I get to tell you that I did make it out. That I today no longer allow my substance use disorder to define me. That today I no longer let others define me. Today, as a woman in recovery and a person that stands before you today, I am proud of the person that I am becoming, and it's taken a long road. It's been a long journey to get here. And over the last 6 years, I have learned so much. And that's what I want to share with you today. Because when I look at the term resilience and I look at the word recovery, for me, that is the definition of my story. For me, resilience is recovery, and that is my story today. That's why I stand up and speak out and I share my story. I share my story in hopes that it inspires and that it brings light to other people, that it brings this awareness and understanding that there is another side to addiction. And I know that because I'm personally walking the journey. But what I also want you to understand is that it's taken me a while to get to this place. And I think for us as people, we're all resilient people. We're all in recovery, right? I think that for us as even a nation and as a world, we're all recovering from something because we've all faced significant challenges and we have all gone through hard times, whether it's suffering from addiction or a mental health disorder or a family loss, or maybe it's just a difficult challenge. Maybe it's a divorce, or maybe it's something that's going on with your children. Maybe something that's going on with your parents. What I know, though, is that we're all in recovery from something. And so I think that like building resilience is really living out that lifestyle, living out your recovery story and your recovery journey. I think it really, for me, stemmed back from this place and learning over the last 6 years of really acknowledging my past. I know that when I intentionally, when I, when we intentionally connect with our past and with our present and where we are today, it helps us build a hopeful future. I think that when, you know, how connections build resilience is when we're able to identify, to be self-aware of the mistakes that we made and the choices that we made in the past, and not allowing those things to define us. Knowing that for me, even though I've made many, many mistakes in my life, today I no longer believe that I am one. And that's the difference. For me, that's resilience. For me, that's showing up on a daily basis and knowing that, sure, I've made many mistakes, but they no longer define who I am as a person. And when I'm able to identify with them and be self-aware with them and show up on a daily basis and to be present and to actively listen and to be here, it helps me move on. It's helped me be able to find forgiveness, and not just forgiveness in myself, but finding forgiveness for other people. Because I know I've hurt a lot of people, and I know a lot of people have hurt me. But at the end of the day, finding forgiveness isn't about them. It's about me. It's about me, so I can find this place for me to strive and to grow and to move on from these things, to move on from the significant challenges that I face. Because I look at where I'm at today and in my recovery journey, just because I got sober doesn't mean that my whole life became perfect. In fact, I am not perfect by any means, and no person is. I still continue to make mistakes on a daily basis. But the resilience that I've been able to build and grow through that is by acknowledging it, being self-aware of it, owning my past, owning my present, showing up, knowing that those are only mistakes that I'm making, that they don't define me as a person, and then being able to move on from it, to find forgiveness, to find better support, to find other ways to cope, to find other ways to heal the pain. And in fact, it's me turning my pain into my power. It allows me then to show up on a daily basis to be a better friend, a better girlfriend, a better leader, a better aunt, a better sister, and a better daughter. Which is what I am most grateful for today. Because my family is still being destroyed by the disease of addiction. My little cousin passed away not too long ago, and my sister is still suffering to this day. And I know how this is impacting my family and how it's impacting millions and millions of people around the world. But I know that when we continue to show up and we continue to speak our truth and we continue to spread light in places where there is complete darkness, that is where we find hope. And I know that that is where we're able to build connections. Because when we share our stories, we speak our truth, we're able to connect with other people. And through that connection, builds compassion. Compassion is what we are so desperately seeking and yearning for, not only as a recovery movement, but as an entire nation, as an entire world. We need more compassion and empathy for those that are struggling and are suffering. And so I appreciate all of you. I thank all of you for joining me in this conversation today. I hope that as you step away from this conversation and as you look to seek and find a stronger resilience in your own life, some of the key things that I really want you to walk away with today is to just really take a moment, like right here and right now with me. I want you to take a really deep breath with me by breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And I want you to just sit here with me for one moment before I let you go. And I want you to think about a significant challenge that you have faced in your life before. Whether it was something personally, or something within your family, or something within your community, I want you to sit and think about what was that biggest challenge that you faced. Now, when you look at the challenge that you had in your life, I want you to think back to how that made you feel. Were you frustrated? Were you angry? Were you resentful? Were you sad? Were you hurtful? What type of feelings come up for you when you think back to that challenge that you had in your life, that significant challenge, something that was life-changing for you? How did that make you feel? What I want you to do next is I want you to think back to what were some of those things that you did to overcome that challenge. Did you ask for help? Did you seek support in your community or within your family or within other people or places? Did you research it? Did you look at how other people maybe overcame that challenge? What were some of the things that you did to get through that challenge, to overcome it? And the reason that I want you to identify what those things were, what type of actions did you take? Because I want you to sit in this reflection and to remember the resilience that you have already created and built in your life. And maybe this challenge you're going through right now, and maybe it's something you're facing today. And I want you to think about, what are you doing to overcome that challenge? What are you doing that could be different in your life? So the next time that same challenge comes into your life, or maybe it's an even more difficult challenge that shows up, and maybe you have to walk through a really long, hard season, I want you to be able to identify what were the things, what were the tools, what were the resources that you had that helped you overcome that challenge. Because those things, those tools, those resources that you have, that is what helps you build resilience. And I know for me, as a person in long-term recovery, I show up with these tools on a daily basis. Whether it's journaling, meditating, counseling, life coaching, business coaching, all the types of support, my tribe that I surround myself with, my family members that I reach out to for support when I need it. All of these things that I have in my toolbox, I've been able to gain and also identify. So when I know that I'm going down a slippery slope, or I know that there's a hard season ahead of me, or I'm facing a significant challenge, I'm able to be self-aware of it. And by being self-aware, it helps me know that I can learn from it, that whatever challenge I'm going through, it helps me identify that this is just maybe a mistake, or this is just a small piece of my life. This is something that I'm going to work through and get through. And that is where the hope comes in. And that's where I'm able to move on from it. That's where I find forgiveness. And that's where I'm able to continue to speak out and share my story and do the great work that I do today. Because I know at the end of the day, for me, being able to show up on a daily basis, and even at the end of the day, when I lay my head down on my pillow at night, I know that I tried my best. I tried to do the best that I can to my ability on a daily basis. And that is how I have built up resilience over these last few years. And I hope that this conversation has brought hope into your own life, for you being able to identify the challenges that you've overcome and what tools are in your toolbox that have helped you to overcome those things. And I hope that you're able to continue to move and use them with whatever comes your way in the future. I thank you all so much for joining me in this presentation today. If you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me at any time. You can find me at www.nadinemuscovich.com, but also you could find me at weallrisetogether.org. Thank you so much, guys.